Hello, everyone, and welcome to this part of the podcast where we're going to be taking upon ourselves to talk about all of the marvellous updates that have been bestowed upon us by Games Workshop via the Balance Update, the Minotaurum Field Manual, that's how you say it, and other supporting documents. Isn't that right, Phil?
Yeah, the Balance Dataslate, basically.
Well, exactly. And the MFM, as they say.
Mm.
That's what the cool kids are calling it now, aren't they?
I guess.
Indeed.
Not cool enough to know.
Well, there you go. That's what it is, you see. We're far too out of the loop now to know these terms anymore. But yes, a balance update in the form of a Balance Dataslate is a very significant and important time in the Warhammer 40,000 hobby because it's an opportunity for Games Workshop to course correct and ultimately deal with any particular problems that have been plaguing the game. And what's most interesting about this Balance Dataslate is it comes after an elongated period of relative inactivity within the world of Warhammer 40,000. Obviously, at the time of recording, the Grotmas calendar has given us a lot of interesting new detachments and things that we will talk about probably in our first January episode once we've actually had an opportunity to see all of them and gotten a feel for actually what that sort of, means in the future. We don't really want to be in the habit of just going through everything kind of piecemeal over time. But broadly, it seems interesting that they've been doing these detachments via the Grotmas calendar over the span of the last, 25 days, 24 days in the lead up to Christmas. Some really interesting elements, some pretty, mad additions as well. So, yeah, lots to really digest and a lot of really crazy things that are going on. So, yeah, to throw this in the mix with the rest of it, it does really start to feel like after a bit of a quiet period, Phil, that 40k is back with a vengeance.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely a lot happening this month for 40k, which is good. It's interesting, keeps it lively. But as you say, yeah, we haven't had many codexes recently.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the thing. It's been relatively quiet, but yeah, those quiet days, weeks and months are now behind us, and we're going to be heading into a very busy 2025, at least early 2025 as it concerns 40k. And obviously, yeah, everything that's sort of coming in here is going to be super interesting. So, yeah, look, the Balance Update or the Balance Dataslate typically has been a tool used to correct problems. Historically, Games Workshop Warhammer 40,000 has always had really bad kind of boogeymen in their game systems that they've needed to balance and deal with. In fact, I believe the Balance Dataslate was kind of first rolled out throughout like 9th edition in it with attempts to kind of cull some of the craziness that was going on in the game. So really, throughout the history of it, the Balance Dataslate has been more about taking things away than giving stuff on top, although there has been a bit of that. But definitely with 10th edition, with all the issues that have been created with armies like the Mechanicus and other factions. What's been really interesting about the 10th edition Balance Dataslate is just how much they do to try and actually update data slates or data sheets and ultimately, improve things, which I suppose is a net positive because people, get to enjoy their armies and actually have potentially compelling competitive builds that they can use for all factions. But what's kind of wild about it is it does really expose some interesting dilemmas with their business model around how they distribute physical media and how quickly that physical media in the form of books is somewhat superseded, updated, or completely nullified by these digital kind of requirements to consistently update on apps and other bits and pieces. But obviously you do get the digital codes, you get the codes to basically use the sort of digital versions of your codex within the app. So I suppose you are, being looked after in that extent. But it is getting wild, isn't it, Phil, when you realise that in the case of like Mechanicum or maybe even something like Dark Angels, so much that is in your physical written book is completely, incorrect when compared to what you see in these Balanced Dataslates or, the actual game as it's intended to be played right now.
Yeah, there's some big changes for sure, especially if you're someone that doesn't keep up to date maybe as much as the more competitive aspect of it. So I can see people, it's a double-edged sword basically. You get people wanting the updates, wanting the balance changes, but then other people find it quite fatiguing to constantly have to learn and adjust the rules. And that ultimately, if you could have your core rule book and your codex, and that's all you need to play for an entire edition, I think that would keep people happy, assuming those things were balanced and working. But that's the bit that isn't, and that's the bit that constantly needs changing or tweaking in some way. So yeah, it's a bit rough, especially for people like with the Cult Ambush rule. That's completely changed for Gene Stealer Cults.
Oh, you're getting ahead of yourself.
Well, I've done some research. I've read some bits. Nice. Things like that. You know, if you're someone that just likes to go to your local store or play at home and you just like to get your physical codex out and just plop it down and read it, you're kind of stuffed unless you just don't care about these things. And I sort of suspect those kind of people are the sorts of people that are quite happy just to play the rules out of the book. So maybe it's fine as the way it is. However, I do feel like it is encouraging people more towards the digital rules. Access to digital rules is really important, and unfortunately they're still all being locked by codes, which is from a physical product. So that sort of is somewhat problematic, and changes to things like index cards, which I think, or, you know, the actual final cards that get produced with the codex, making changes to that is, I guess, quite frustrating, because that's that's a nice gaming accessory that you have bought to make your games easier. And if they're now out of date, it's not making your life easier anymore. So you've got to then either, you know, literally write on them, which no one probably wants to do because they see them as like precious things, or you've just got to memorize that, oh yeah, this unit, the stats have changed. So if it's literally one unit in an entire army, it's probably not a big deal. But if it's a bunch of stuff, then it becomes a real issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's not to say that 40k is the only kind of guilty offender of this. They do the same with AOS. I was playing on a live stream with Joe the other day, and he was running Disciples of Zinch, which is a faction in Age of Sigmar, and they made changes to some of their abilities to try and balance them, give them more viability, and those changes obviously aren't on the cards, that you need to be, you know, using the app. So, you know, this is a universal situation within the kind of modern Games Workshop business ethos around rules distribution. But it is also very kind of interesting in terms of how much it kind of feels it's prevalent within 40k, especially with things like Mechanicus, and also things like, you know, the changes that are brought in with this Balance Dataslate specifically for Space Marines. I mean, you know, you will have heard this from other people or read it yourself. The Space Marine changes in this Balance Dataslate are vast, and because that is the case, again, it's a massive change to one of, if not the most popular army. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how that has an effect on things going forwards. Because, yeah, ultimately, making big sweeping changes to Space Marines affects the biggest possible audience of potential players. So it's going to be interesting to see how those changes kind of filter out and what kind of impact that has on the armies and the games. But yeah, I think overall, it feels like we're in this tweaking period now with 40k, though, with the Balanced Dataslate. Regardless of what some people, ourselves included, think about the overall kind of playability or kind of design philosophy of Warhammer 40,000's 10th edition, you can't argue that, at least when being played competitively, there is a really rich diversity of lists and armies that are viable, and the balance within that game is objectively good when viewed for a very specific lens. When played to the competitive expectations, the game does produce what feels like a good level of balance. Whether or not the game is what you want it to be personally is ultimately something that, you know, you yourselves need to kind of wrestle with. Myself and Phil have been quite consistent in communicating that it's not our favorite edition, but ultimately we can't and won't pretend that within what it is, that it isn't balanced, because it really is for what it is at the moment. But there are definitely some haves and have-nots within the kind of ecosystem of the game, and, you know, some armies that perform really well competitively that, you know, are somewhat undesirable from a casual perspective, just due to the nature of how much they cost, how much their mechanics kind of confuse and befuddle people. So I think that's the thing. I think ultimately this balanced data slate is less about fixing big problems and more about tweaking things and trying to address, small niggles that affect very competitively minded players, which ultimately is the core focus of Warhammer 40,000's 10th edition. 9th and 10th are very, very competitive focused editions. That's why they do all of this stuff, because they've got to, keep their competitive scene happy, because ultimately the perception is that they buy a lot of figures and spend a lot of time. So they need to be placated far more than the casual scene that, by all accounts, can just kind of figure things out for themselves.
Well, I think it's more of a trickle-down effect, right? It's if you fix it for the people that are going to literally break the game, you're also fixing it for the casual people, which probably aren't going to break it, but might be either a few offenders that are deliberately breaking it in their local scenes, or people that accidentally stumble across a crazy combo. And even if they're not necessarily intending to curb stomp their opponent, might just be doing it by the inherent power level of a particular army or faction. So in theory, it's still fixing it for everyone. But yeah, you then get these inherent challenges of the kind of the constant changes, constant updates, and a lot more sort of paperwork to read through and digest. It's interesting with this one. They've definitely done less points changes. And I think they sort of acknowledge that, and that they're trying to do more sort of actual rules changes rather than points changes, whereas historically they've only ever wanted to do points changes because of the issue we talked about. Like, we don't want to invalidate the rules and the physical media that you're purchasing. Whereas points can be a lot more fluid, but your actual data sheets are going to be correct. Whereas I think they've finally acknowledged that points can only get you so far. And if a unit has terrible rules, it could almost be dirt cheap and it will still be unplayable because the rules just aren't good enough. So it's kind of nice to see that actually be addressed, despite it having its own complications.
Totally. And I 100% agree with that. I think it is the right thing for the overall state of the game that they make these changes, because, at the end of the day, having, played the game for many years, it was always really absurd, especially when you were a Space Marine player. Like, I remember the period of time that was like 6th to 7th edition Warhammer 40,000, where for some weird little quirk, basically scouts back in the day used to be weapon skill, basically would be considered weapon skill 4+ today. Back in the day, it was weapon skill 3, bizarrely. But anyway, they'd be like weapon skill, ballistic skill 4+. And then in the Space Marine book in 7th edition, they went, scouts are now weapon skill, ballistic skill 3+, because, it makes sense. They're still sort of Space Marine-y. But then weirdly, the Blood Angels, because they were like one of the last 6th edition or like early 6th edition books before the new Space Marine book came out, and because they never got updated, their scouts stayed weapon skill, ballistic skill 4+ all the way up until them doing an errata FAQ at the very end of the edition. And it was always an absurdity, because you were like, well, clearly the intention is that they're supposed to be this, because that's what they've done on later publications. But they're, so that's the thing. Compared to the days of old, it is nice that they have that kind of, regular comms and make things better for players, especially, Marine players that do kind of struggle with some of that weird latency around, the core Space Marine book versus those supplements. Although, again, that's based on a very different model in terms of how those supplements used to behave, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, look, rather than, procrastinating about it any further, let's just get into the Balance Dataslate, talk about the things that have changed, and ultimately, share our thoughts on that. So we're only going to talk about the red stuff. You can see it on your screen now for those of you watching us on YouTube. We're only going to talk about the changes because obviously there's no point acknowledging the things that have been rather than the things that will now be or are now the norm. So stratagems that allow a closer setup range. So bizarrely, they specifically call it out as a stratagem. So if a stratagem has an effect that allows a target unit to set up more than 3 horizontally away from all enemy models, units, etc., that part of the effect is changed to say no more than 6 horizontally away. Now, as I understand it, and we'll get to this when we see it, they have also updated any latent native abilities that also would have given you that benefit as well. So, for example, Inceptors have been moved to the same rule, but they've just been updated in their relevant section. And we'll see that in a bit. But basically, if you had a stratagem that allows you to be deployed within 3, or just outside of 3, rather, that now changes to 6. So effectively what it means is it is now extraordinarily difficult for you to pop up into the air and come back down on an objective. Mathematically speaking, there is a very, very rare instance where it could occur, which is ultimately if someone's got a toe in on the very outskirt with one miniature on, one outskirt of the big circle around the circle. Because obviously, remember, the actual objective marker itself is about an inch across, or maybe just longer than an inch, or maybe just less.
So probably just a bit more, because it should be 32 millimeters, right?
That's correct, yes. You're absolutely right, 32 mil. So it's a little bit more than an inch. So theoretically, from one end to the other, the space of the objective marker is like 7 point something inches.
That sounds about right.
So there are very particular instances where this will still allow you to get a toe in on an objective, but most of the time you're probably not going to be doing it anymore. So it's more for the intent of getting stuff in close that wants to be utilizing rapid fire weapons, or just, blasting you, or just getting the line of sight kind of benefits, basically. So sneaking in behind your lines and causing you a lot of damage rather than just, getting objectives. So seems like a sensible change. I'm okay with it. It does feel like it's got some pros and cons, but on the whole, I think it probably works to the benefit of the game to tweak and change that. What was your vibe on that, Phil?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think oddly that they've given you under the core rules, they're specifying stratagems and not just making it a universal ruling on abilities and stratagems that do this thing, and then they've added it on in individual segments, calling out individual units. That's a bit odd. But I mean, other than that, I don't mind it too much. I used to use it quite a lot with my Inceptors. I thought it was quite good. Again, it was mostly towing in onto an objective and then trying to shoot or charge onto the objective with another unit to try and wipe them out. So I'm then on it with my Inceptors. So I guess that will make it a little bit harder. I almost feel like the problem isn't having a unit that can do this ability. It's that they've given it to so many units across the game that's maybe causing it. Because I don't think Inceptors having it in and of themselves is a problem for Space Marines, but I feel like so many armies have that ability now. If you're an army that doesn't have that ability, it feels really penalizing. Whereas when it first came out, it was pretty much just Inceptors that could do it, and it's like, oh, cool, it's like a thing for them. But now it's just become one of those, universal sort of gimmicky tricks that they want to apply to everyone. So yeah, then it gets into the haves and have not issues, which I guess is what's now caused a problem.
Well, I think the situation they find themselves with is that, it was a good rule that worked well for Marines, and, with all these sort of good ideas that filter into kind of core concepts, it just becomes a very prevalent thing, much like the CP strat or rather the CP reduction abilities. Those things are relatively commonplace. So, yeah, it makes sense that they tweaked it. So that's interesting. They've also changed the stratagems that worsen armor penetration. So if a stratagem has an effect that says until the end of the phase, each time attack targets your unit, worsen the armor penetration characteristic by 1. Effectively, that now is basically unit to unit. So effectively, if Phil's unit of interceptors targets my unit of intercessors, I can use Armor of Contempt for that exchange. But if he then targets me with a Predator Annihilator, I am no longer reducing the AP of that Predator Annihilator.
Well, Dan, I don't have a Predator Annihilator. Why would I? That's a terrible example.
Well, I apologise for not, picking a particularly, relevant. If he targeted me with a dreadnought, a Contemptor dreadnought, which isn't even a legal profile anymore.
That's true. Yeah, we're playing Legends here, everyone.
That's it. If you targeted me with your Redemptor, no, you don't have a Redemptor.
I do. It's just not painted.
But, there you go. Anyway, sorry, Phil, for that terrible example. The point is,
yes,
it's just a unit-to-unit interaction, not a. I've done this now, so I've got extra armor against everything.
Yeah, I mean, that feels sensible, because I think there are times where it's just really punitive when a stratagem like that pops off, and especially if they're in cover and they've got really good save already, it just makes them impossible to shift. I mean, I think the only other way they could have done it is to sort of make those things not stack with cover, either to begin with or once you activate the stratagem, so it's slightly easier to actually knock down their AP.
I think given the prevalence of cover as well within the game, those kind of abilities became very strong very quickly. I do think this is the right way to do it, because it does mean that you can, make a tactical decision of when you really want to engage that ability, as opposed to just basically, no-braining it and just being like, well, this is my most important thing. You've targeted it. I know you're going to continue to target, do that. But then, there were layers of strategy to it before as well, where people could have lined up shots but actually made it seem like they wanted one thing but were actually going for another. But, I mean, again, in most instances, the way the game was played, it was pretty clear, what your priority targets were and why they had to be removed. So, yeah, again, a very sensible, logical thing. I mean, I struggle with it a little bit because I quite like the fact that I do a thing and the effect of it stays on the unit. I think that's quite a easily understood, kind of player journey, if you will, or, very easily understood method. But whatever, it makes sense because it was definitely a bit too short.
Yeah, I sort of feel like both things can be correct, but it's just a sort of personal preference in terms of the style of the mechanic, in terms of which one you would rather have. Obviously, one's stronger than the other for the defending player, so it depends on which way you want to lean into.
Yeah, absolutely. So next along, we have our faction rules, and we're starting with the Adeptus Sororitas. I'm not super memorable on what the Adeptus Sororitas do. We did do a review of the Codex way back when, but ultimately I've not really thought about it since. I've played against them a bunch. They seem really good. The Miracle Dice and the Axe of Faith always seemed crazy strong, and they seem to have addressed that to try and effectively make it less good. So Axe of Faith gain Miracle Dice section change. If your army faction is Adeptus Sororitas, you gain 1 Miracle Dice. So you basically, that was before. But in addition, at the start of each battle round and at the end of each phase, if one or more Adeptus Sororitas unit from your army were destroyed that phase. Now, as I understand it, that is basically different because you get it at the start of each battle round. So you get 1 at the start and you get 1 at the end if a unit has been destroyed, so you don't get it per unit. You just get 1. I
think it used to be each time a unit got destroyed, you gained a miracle dice. I don't know if there was one maybe at the start of your turn, and they've changed it to battle round. Perhaps this is one of the issues we have with the Balance Dataslate, as there's no design or commentary to remind you what it was before, and if you predominantly use the app has already been updated, so you can't check to see what it was, unless, of course, you've got the historical, physical media, the codex, the index cards.
Or even that may be irrelevant because it may have had a change.
Well, yes, the Balance Dataslate might have made a change, and then they've either course corrected that change or amended it even further. So I do wish they had those things, but greater minds, I'm sure, would have done those kind of articles somewhere out on the internet if you need those details.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think GW at this point just rely on the community, people like ourselves who do these kind of videos and podcasts, etc., to put out this kind of content and address this for them. So people are really that invested, they can dive deeper. But again, I do think that level of service from GW would be appreciated. I haven't seen a MetaWatch article out of them in ages.
No, they just seem to have given up with those.
Which is wild, right? Because they just had their World Championships, and I would have thought they would have, done a bit of a recce on that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, now seems to make sense for them to have done one to discuss these changes. I sort of feel like there wasn't much point for 40k for a while because there wasn't really. It doesn't feel like much had been going on, like you said, because the codex releases have slowed down. But then the codex releases never really dictated the meta watch. It was always more to do with tournaments and the Balance Dataslate. So it sort of makes sense to have them when something like this happens and not just do it on a weekly basis, circulating around the different gaming systems, which is what they did. It was like every week it was a different one. But, that basically meant you got one a month or whatever for 40k, which seems, if that was the case, that was far too many.
Yeah. Look, at this point, I think when it comes to Adeptus Sororitas, because we're not like the most, passionate or knowledgeable Sisters players, we're probably not going to go into excruciating detail on all these other changes. It just looks like some very minor tweaks to some abilities. The big change definitely seems to be the Miracle Dice thing, which makes a lot of sense. They've changed the Triumph of St. Catherine to basically make it the Miracle Dice that you create as a result of meeting the criteria just becomes a value of 6 rather than rolling a d6 for it. And they seem to have really gone to town on the bringers of Flame Detachment, which is a very strong detachment, so it makes sense. So they've evidently increased the CP cost of very powerful stratagems, and made a few changes here and there. So overall, it seems like a lot of nerfs for Sororitas, which makes sense. They've been very, very strong, won a lot of events. It makes sense that they are trying hard to, neuter and manage those efficiently. So, seems like good changes for Sororitas, but I imagine if you are a die-hard Sisters player, you're probably a bit butthurt by the fact that all your broken game mechanics have been somewhat fixed. But seems logical and sensible to me.
Yeah, no, completely agree.
On the topic of another broken faction, which isn't broken at all, they just won the recent World Championship event, which meant that everyone who plays Custodes got concerned that they were going to come with some kind of mass set of nerfs. The truth is they've seemingly done something entirely different. And on top of giving you what seems like a really good Dreadnought detachment from Grotmus, they have come in and made massive improvements to one of the most underrepresented units in the entire army, and that is, of course, the jet bike. So, Phil, those Thunder Warriors of yours have become all the more impressive now with the changes that are coming to the Custodes.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was looking through the balance data. The MFM, the Miniature Field Manual, and basically was like, oh, they put these up in points. Okay. But I knew they had done some tweaks, but I was like, I wouldn't have thought they would need to increase the points as well. But obviously they have. And actually they have given them quite a lot of benefits. It's not just one. So the main one is that basically for the captain and the regular bikes, their toughness characteristic goes to 7. I believe it was 6 before. So it's gone up by 1. And then the wounds have gone up to 8. And I think it was 6 before, so maybe it's gained 2. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's gone up by 1 or 2.
The shield captain on Jetbike has gone up to 8. The regular
it's 5.
Is 5.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's good.
Because if they were all toughness 7-8 wounds, Phil, that would have been utterly
tasty.
Mad.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. So I played them when I went to, obviously, No Retreat. They were literally the unit that died first thing every single turn 1 of all my games that I played. They just were like pieces of paper that blew away in the wind. It was very underwhelming and disappointing. And all the other, because there was quite a few Custodes players, they were all like, Dawn Eagles need to have more wounds and have more toughness. So in a way, the community has been listened to, and I think that's a worthy change for sure. And then the firepower that they had was also a bit rubbish, so they've made some changes to there. So the Salvo launcher, which is basically the missile launcher, that's now twin linked, which is good. The strength has gone up to 10. Who knows what it was before? I'm guessing an 8.
It was 8 before. I think it was like a melter missile before.
Yeah, it's now AP3, and the damage is D6 plus 1. I'm pretty sure it was D6 before. So
no, it was 3 before.
Oh, was it 3? Oh, wow.
It was just flat damage 3, yeah.
It's made a big difference. Obviously, it's still only one shot, but you do hit on 2, so it's not, so bad in that respect. And then it is only strength 10, and a lot of vehicles have a great toughness than 10, but the fact that it's twin-linked sort of makes up for that, I think. So that's now definitely much more viable option than it was before.
Oh, massively so, yeah.
And then the Hurricane Bolter, the only changes there is the AP's gone to 1, and the damage is to 2, again going from, I assume, 0 and 1 damage. And it's a rapid fire, free, twin-linked, 3 attacks. It's only strength 4, but it's now...
Twin-linked though, right?
Yeah, it's now twin-linked, and damage 2 means it could be a viable, like, marine killer type of unit. So... And
a lot of really... It could do some decent amount of damage to other vehicles and monsters as well. Obviously, you could not really do very much to, say, like a Land Raider, but you would theoretically do some pretty reasonable damage to some of the lighter vehicles. And the fact is that that in the volumes that you produce, so obviously if you've got 3 units and you're within 9 inches, 3 models in the unit and you're within 9 inches, that's going to be 18 shots, hitting on 2s, re-rolling your wounds. So yeah, I mean, -1 AP and 2 damage, it's pretty tasty. And then don't forget, you can charge afterwards. And if I remember correctly, there's still lance. They've still got good amounts of attacks. They hit good on charge. Or the almost more interesting thing is the great fix of a Quicksilver execution ability, which was a sort of, you move over the unit and you can do mortal wounds. But it used to be, so it's a once per battle ability, but it used to be only on an advanced move. But now it's a normal move or advanced move, which is fantastic, because basically if you advanced, you could never charge. And if you advanced, you also couldn't shoot, because nothing had... It was like one of the few units in the Custodes that wasn't assault weapons in terms of its shooting. So it was like, cool, I can do mortal wounds and literally nothing else with this unit. You were sort of stuck there. You couldn't do it when you're falling back. You couldn't, then charge in afterwards, and you couldn't shoot. So it's like the trade-off to just do a few mortal wounds was completely pointless, really. Whereas now you can do a normal move over something, do some mortal wounds, because you roll a dice, and for every 2 up you do a mortal... Oh, you suffer 2 mortal wounds. That's pretty good. With your 3 guys... that's not too bad. That's, potentially 6 mortal wounds, quite straightforward there. And then you can charge into either that unit or a different unit, and still shoot as well. So it's like, that's really strong now. And once I saw that, I was like, okay, I kind of get why they've gone up in points now, because the increase in toughness and wounds in and of itself, I don't think would have justified the points cost going up, because they were because they needed that just to be viable at the current points that they were. So, yeah, I mean, this is a great change. It's really interesting and exciting to sort of play with the bikes some more and not feel like I'm sort of having it there for fun and knowing it's just going to do You
nothing.
wouldn't want to just have fun, would you, mate? That's the thing.
I mean, you want to have fun, but you also want it to do something as well before it dies.
Winning is fun, let's be fair, right?
A win can be fun as well.
Winning is fun.
Crushing your enemies all before you.
Exactly. Look, I think, really good changes to Custodes, that in conjunction with what they've done with the Dreadnought list, or the vehicle list that they've just done, the detachment. Yeah, it seems like a really nice set of changes. Mechanicus are the same as they were before, no changes to them, although it's always funny when you look at this, the sheer volume of changes that...
They had a lot of changes last time, yeah.
Absolutely wild. Eldari are all the same. Obviously, they got a new book coming around the corner, so no one is shocked that they are not getting much attention at the moment. Any point changes that they've had are relatively insignificant. So, yeah, obviously looking forward to new Eldari. Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, have had some changes to Lord Solar Leonidas. So tell us about those, Phil.
So under the orders section, this officer can issue up to 3 orders to regiment units and squadron units. which I thought he could do before. So I can only assume maybe they've taken off the ability to also order Titanic units, because that was a thing he could do.
Ooh.
So I'm not entirely sure what this change was, because I haven't played with Leontis in a while. So my memory is a little bit hazy on this. I can only assume that's what it is, because regiment units is just infantry, squadron units was always vehicles. Titanic units was never under squadron, and I'm sure he could issue orders to Titanic units before. So
what would have been like his Bane blades? And
things like Bane blades and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's now gone, which is a bit of a shame. But I could see the efficiency in one order to, like, say, re-roll hit rolls, or, you know, increase your ballistics or whatever it might be on one unit with a ton of guns is way more efficient than like one Lehman Russ, for example. So I can see why maybe that's been taken off.
No, indeed. They also seem to have made one little change to the ability of precision drops for the Tempestus Aquilons, who are the new kill team that was released alongside the new kill team game. So precision drop in your movement phase when this unit is set up on the battlefield using the Teacher ability. It has to be 6 inches away, because obviously before it was 3 inches. Now it is 6. I
assume what they've done is they've also specified in your movement phase, so you can't use it in your opponent's turn with the Shashin that I can't remember, but you will.
Rapid ingress,
that's it. Yeah, so I think that's why they've added that caveat in there.
There you go. They've added double bubble on that. It has to be in your movement phase, and you can only be within 6. And then obviously if you use Deep Strike under normal conditions via Rapid Ingress, you have to be 9 away, which makes sense. I love the Blood Angels one. They've simply written none.
They deserve it.
For Blood Angels.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose at least it's clear. It doesn't make the Blood Angels players just feel like they've been forgotten. In a way, it's sort of worse, because it's like, nothing for you, you're fine.
But it makes perfect sense. Their codex literally just came out. So it's like I assume they just want the dust to settle on that book to see how people are playing with it, and then eventually they will get changes. So yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Black Templars, it's just universal changes, which we'll get into when we start talking about Space Marines, which is the transport capacity of the Repulsor Executioner has increased to 7, was I think 6, maybe 5 for a while. So that's gone up to 7. And they've changed the armor penetration characteristic of combat knives to -1, which is again universal.
I can assume it went from it would have been 6 before, because it would have been a 5-man unit plus a character. But as there's so many 6-man units now, because it's free and then you can double it up to 6, they've gone, well, we want to have a character for that unit as well. So yeah, it's odd.
Your unit of Blade Guard with your captain, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
But you can't have an ancient with them as well.
No, sadly not, unless of course you take a regular repulsor, in which case fair play. Chaos Knights have a small change in the form of Harbingers of Dread ability. If your army faction is Chaos Knights, each model from your army with this ability has the following Dread abilities, and then it's basically the same as it was before. So if your army is faction, it's Chaos Knights. Each model from your army with this ability has the following Dread abilities. I don't know what that's changed. I can't. I've never even looked at the Chaos Knight rules.
Yeah, unless it was you had to like pick one, and now you just get both potentially.
Maybe.
But again, who knows what it would be?
They've got a few other words here in Aura of Terror enhancement. Chaos Knight models only if you control an objective marker at the end of your command phase and the bearer is within range of that objective marker. That objective marker is said to be tainted and remains under your control until your opponent's level of control over that objective marker is greater than yours at the end of a phase. In addition, while an objective marker is tainted and under your control, that objective, fine, it feels like it's just one of those weird rules clarifications around, because basically in a previous Balance Dataslate, they changed the way that controlling an objective worked. It was essentially changed from start of, end of turn to end of phase. So essentially, you could take objectives off of people at the end of phases, as opposed to it only coming into effect at the end of turn. So effectively, that's how that worked. And evidently, these taint abilities, so this one in particular probably wasn't triggering in the same way. So it feels like this is just a simple, consolidation of that new design philosophy. So that makes sense. And the Traitor's Mark enhancement, Chaos Knight model only. In your movement phase, please select one enemy unit. I don't know where I got please from. Sorry, that's my dyslexia kicking in. In your movement phase, select one enemy unit within 12 inches of the bearer. The enemy unit must take a battle shock test. Again, no idea what that was before, but it's that now. So, yay.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I always think with those battle shock tests, you should have -1 to your leadership or something, or to the roll, just to make it harder to pass these sorts of tests.
Exactly. Chaos Space Marines, the Dread Talons attachment, Screaming Descent, has been changed from 3 inches to 6 inches, and then 9 inches in other instances, again, bringing it in line with the core philosophy that they've done here. And then they've also made their Predator Annihilators re-roll their damage rolls, which is something that's happened to all Predator Annihilators, just so you know, Phil.
Well, if only I had a Predator Annihilator.
Exactly. That's why I said Predator Annihilator earlier, because it's a unit that is, on the tip of everyone's tongue now.
Lovely stuff.
Everyone's going out there and buying loads of Predator Annihilators all of a sudden.
Assuming they're not sold out.
Assuming they're not sold out already, indeed. Only change to Chaos Demons, Phil, is the bite of the Screamer has improved to Weapon Skill 3+, and now has anti-monster and anti-vehicle 4+. Ooh.
I mean, that's pretty good. Pretty tasty, as they might say.
Yeah. There you go. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Good banter. Then we get into Dark Angels. I mean, at this point, it's pretty mad, the amount of changes.
Come on, Dan. You're the Dark Angels person. How good is this?
Well, look, the first things first, we may as well just say it for the sake of saying it. They've changed Lionel Johnson, everybody. Lionel Johnson now has a sweep attack that has 16 attacks as it did before, hits on 2s as it did before, has straight 6 as it was before, is -3 as it was before, but now is 2 damage, Phil.
So that's the only thing they've changed, is they made it from 1 damage to 2 damage. Okay.
Which is massive, though. That makes
yes, because it just means you kill all the Marines with your 16 attacks.
Yes, with Sustain Hit 1. Bear in mind, Phil, that's what he had in the original Dark Angel Index.
Oh, so did they turn it down?
No, they toned it down to 1. Yeah. So basically in the Index he had damage 2, and then they made it damage 1 in the Codex, and then obviously now they've made it damage 2 again. So that's good, isn't it?
I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it's good. It's almost like you would just, I was going to say you'd almost use that profile all the time. Unless you're up against something ridiculously tough, like if you're basically attacking toughness 12 or above, then you do the lethal hits, the strike one. Otherwise, you'll just always do the sweep one. Which,
always.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's meant to be like mini god, so you want him to be good, but that just feels excessively good. I wouldn't like to play against that. I would be like, remember the days when he only did 1 damage?
No longer, Phil. No longer. I suppose on the statistical averages, he would probably, hitting on 2s, well, theoretically, he should probably just hit 16 times, because I suppose as the maths goes.
Oh, with the sustained hits 1, I think it was average out.
You'll hit as much, you'll miss as many times as you'll roll 6s. Yeah. So, pretty wild. But then obviously with, Oath of Moment, you're going to obviously get those re-rolls and things. So, pretty mad.
True. Yeah, at least it's not strength 8, because then he'd be wounding Marines on 2s. So that's the sort of 1 saving grace against, a Marine type unit. Yeah, because it'd be wounding on 3s, AP -3. Yeah, it's good. It's a good profile.
It's a good profile. That is his one gimmick. He is quite the weapon. They've changed the Raven Wing detachment, the Master of Maneuvers detachment rules. So Adeptus Astarte mounted units from your army are eligible to shoot and declare charges in the turn in which they advanced or fell back. That's a massive change to that. It used to be that you just used to shoot. Now you can shoot and charge. Pretty mad, eh?
Very good. Yeah. That's strong.
Very, very strong. And then Masters of Maneuvers Enhancement, Ravenwing model only. You can reroll advance and charge rolls made for the bearer's unit. That's also really, really strong.
Okay. So someone's got a lot of love for Dark Angels in the design team. That's
what's interesting about it as well, though. Well, so okay, fair enough. If this happens to be, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but they have changed the rules for Outriders. So Outriders used to have an ability where they didn't roll advanced rolls; they just went flat 6.
Right. Yeah.
They've changed that now. So this is more relevant in the case of giving it to, say, a chaplain leading a unit of Outriders. Mm-hmm. But where it's most prevalent is where you're adding the Ravenwing Command Squad to a unit of Black Knights, because obviously the Ravenwing Command Squad is 3 Ravenwing bikers, an apothecary, a standard, and a champion. And I believe you give them this enhancement. And then you've got basically a 9 bike unit, potentially 12 bike unit. I forget if you can take 9 Ravenwing Black Knights or if it's capped at 6. Either way, it's a lot of terrifying Ravenwing bikers that can now, advance up, shoot their plasma talons, and then charge you. And when they charge you, Phil, they've now got devastating wounds. Yeah.
Oh no. No, I don't like this at all. It's too good. Take it back. Good. Send it back to the restaurant. Give me something else. Give me cold soup, please.
Yeah, cold soup. Get all these rules off of these guys. And then Samael, another of the Ravenwings, the Grand Master of the Ravenwings. Basically, while this model is leading a unit, that unit is eligible to shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which it advanced. If that unit is already eligible to shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which it advanced, which it probably will be, add 1 to the advance and charge rolls made for that unit instead. Way, isn't it?
Right, yeah. And so were they? I mean, because there wasn't a MetaWatch article. Well, I don't know this, but were Dark Angels at the bottom of the league, so to speak?
Ravenwing were completely unrepresented. I mean,
no. Ravenwing are probably unrepresented because Deathwing were so good. That doesn't mean you need to bring Ravenwing up to the Deathwing level. It just means you probably need to tone down Deathwing. Is what I would say.
No. I think you just need to bring Ravenwing up, mate. I think that's what everyone's asking.
Yeah. But all the Dark Angel players are definitely asking for that. Now, if they were statistically at the bottom and not performing well, I would understand these changes because these all seem very good, very strong. I mean, if I was a Dark Angels player, I'd be very happy with these changes.
They seem strong. They seem good. I'm pretty content with what they've done. I think, again, when you're looking at the game competitively, though, you do still struggle with mounted units because there's so much terrain.
Well, they can't move through terrain and stuff like that,
Yeah, so they do, on most terrain layouts, they're still going to struggle to see play just because you just can't put them where they need to be because, the walls are everywhere and everyone does that thing where they go, I'm just outside of the wall enough that you can't charge me.
Yeah, but that's, there are fundamental issues with certain units and mechanics within the game. Things that are highly maneuverable tend to be much more important in an edition like this than in previous editions because you need maneuverability to score your points. So that inherently favors something that's just sort of going to stand there and shoot, no matter how good that shooting is. But that's just like an inherent design issue, right? If your game is designed around having tons of terrain and infantry can just move through it, anything that isn't infantry is going to have some inherent penalization in that game mechanics and the context of the game. So.
Oh, totally. I think that's the thing, though, right? Is like ultimately that's where they've landed with it. So that's the biggest problem, the biggest hurdle that these bikes and other kind of mounted units struggle to overcome. The way they've penalised the fly keyword, everything. It's just basically it just makes it super difficult. So yeah, look, long story short is if you're playing a casual game of Warhammer 40,000 down the club with friends, because typically you're not playing casual games of Warhammer 40,000s if you're doing pickup games, because most people who are playing it in that capacity just want to play tournament-style games. But if you are playing a casual game with your friends on somewhat old-school style terrain, this is probably really good. But yeah, I still don't think it's going to necessarily see much play in tournaments just because, you know, again, having played at a tournament recently, looking at that kind of ETC terrain layouts that they were using, I just couldn't fathom how a big unit of bikes would get any.
Well, I think you've answered your own question. It wouldn't be a big unit of bikes. It would be a small unit of bikes, and lots of them.
Yeah, well, but then that goes against the kind of philosophy
3.
of these things because you're trying to kind of like
maximize your efficiencies.
Yeah. You want to load up the advantages. But anyway, it's all moot. It is what it is. We'll move on to Death Guard. So the only changes to Death Guard are
the Predator Annihilator and Mortarion can Deep Strike.
That's correct. Yes, absolutely. Which I'm surprised he couldn't before, but now he can.
With those big wings, you would have thought so, but maybe that was just sort of overlooked.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of those ones where probably people were doing it the whole time, and then someone was like, he actually doesn't have Deep Strike. Be like, what? Oh God, whoops.
Here's the thing: just because something can fly doesn't mean it can, miraculously appear on the tabletop anywhere it wants to. I like to think he's a bit more of a, he's a bloke fly, right? He's a little hovering guy. He's like,
That's true. It's like a little bumblebee.
Yeah, exactly. He can just hover gently above the ground. He can't, be whizzing around all over the place.
He has to put an excruciating large amount of effort into just maintaining a relatively small...
exactly. Yeah, that's what I think, yeah.
That's it. Isn't that what they say about like bumblebees, that they, by all accounts, they shouldn't be able to fly? Like if you basically apply everything we know about flight and science, etc., bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly, yet they do.
Quite possibly.
Anyway, doesn't matter. Drakari don't have any changes. Good for them.
Death Watch don't either.
Oh yeah, Death Watch don't either. So there we go. Good Lord. Where do you even begin with Genestealer Cult? Wow.
There's a lot. Shall I summarise it as best I can? So rather than having the usual stuff used to come back, and I believe it was just on like a 5-up dice roll. So you had no control over which units would be coming back. Instead, they've given you...
Wasn't it in the first battle round it was a 4+ or something? Like if they died earlier, they came back easier.
Yes, I think you might be right, actually. Yeah, that vaguely rings a bell. So I think that was the case. Now they've given you resurgence points, so you can be a bit more tactical with it. So if your whole army is Genestealer Cults, you get a number of resurgence points. So a Strike Force game, which is your standard size, gives you 10. If you're doing the smaller size game, it gives you 6 and 14 for the big size games. I assume no one ever plays. I've never heard of people talk about Onslaught games, but maybe people do play them.
I certainly haven't.
And then, anyway, each time the unit is destroyed, if every model in that unit has this ability, you can spend points as shown below. So weirdly, there's a very limited list of stuff that can come back. I don't know if this completely lines up with what you had before, because before it was pretty much everything but the characters, I want to say, and the vehicles.
Like, mounted things, it was like infantry, basically.
Well, no, you still had mounted things like the jackals. So here you've got...
you did, you got the jackals, didn't you? Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
So here you've got aberrants, you've got acolyte hybrids with all their different weapons, and hybrid metamorphs as well, outland jackals, neophyte hybrids, and pure stream gene stealers. They all range from 2 points is the smallest to 8 is the biggest, to give you a board, which is interesting because your strike force, you get 10 points in total. So Interesting. And then depending on how many are in the units, if you're sort of your standard strength or your double, points cost is different there as well. So there is some nuance to that. And then basically an identical unit comes back. All your one-shot weapons come back. You get to place one cult ambush marker on the table. It's got to be 9 inches away from everything else. And then the unit that comes back gets placed in Cult Ambush. And then Cult Ambush is a type of strategic reserve. Units in Cult Ambush cannot be targeted with a rapid ingress stratagem, but can be set up on the battlefield using a Cult Ambush marker as described below, or by following the rules for strategic reserve in a subsequent phase. And the only other change they've done is they've specifically said it is a 32mm diameter marker for the Cult Ambush marker, because I guessed before they would like place a token or a marker down, but they didn't specify how big that was, so you could make it as big or as small as you like. And then I believe it's sort of similar rules as before, where, you know, if you end up closer to a token, if an enemy comes closer to it, that token disappears. And then, you know, when it's your turn, you can bring that unit back on via that token. I assume I've not reread it, but that's how it worked before.
Apologies for the technical difficulties, everybody. Essentially, I'm just interrupting because I essentially go on a mad rant about GSE that, in my personal opinion, is totally ill-informed and completely stupid. And I've had time to reflect on it, and I've chosen to change it up for me basically saying, I'm not a big fan of the rules, but maybe my initial response to them was more extreme than was necessary. So thanks, Phil, for helping me realise the error of my ways on that one.
No, come on, Dan, keep it in, or give it to the patrons. They want to hear the raw juice coming from your lips.
But it was such a stupid, like, it was just, I listened back to it and I was like, what was I on? Like, it's not that bad.
It was a hot take indeed, put it that way.
It was a really hot take. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do.
I assumed you did it for the clicks on the YouTube segment.
Maybe. I'll tell you what I'll do, Phil. I'm going to leave it in now. Fine. But just know that I'm already regretting it and I feel like it's wrong.
Brilliant.
So there you go. Enjoy me being completely wrong.
Perfect.
Have at it. There we go. Good.
A Christmas present.
There you go. I accept my mistake. Whoopsie daisy. Oh well. Sometimes you just... I'm really grouchy this week. That's what it is, you know. I haven't slept enough. It was, I've been drinking too much. That's my problem. Too much drink.
Fair. I mean, it is Christmas time.
Exactly. But, you know, it's supposed to be a time of goodwill and cheer. I've just been...
You're being Scrooge.
Exactly. I'm filled with rage. Anyway, there you go. Enjoy this really, really unnecessary rant about GSE and know that I'm wrong. I mean, I'll just say it for the sake of saying it. I hate this. I think it's absolutely terrible. Ooh. And I think it is an incredibly unelegant way of trying to solve the GSC situation, which, by the way, is an appalling state. Like, I feel for GSC players so much because Games Workshop, first of all, have the audacity to charge you a fortune to put this thing on the tabletop. It's probably the most, if not one, well, it's definitely one of the, but it might be the most expensive army to put on the tabletop. This and Mechanicum are extraordinarily expensive. The pound per point is wild. And Games Workshop have created a system now where essentially you can field armies of hundreds of Space Marines. So in a situation where they have balanced it in such a terrible way, not terrible because it is balanced, but in such a mad way that the armies consist of hundreds of super elite miniatures, having an army that essentially used to rely on a sort of horde style mechanic or, you know, ambushy type mechanics, it just exposes a massive issue with the core design philosophy of 40k's 10th edition and how it just doesn't meaningfully accommodate a diverse array of different, you know, ideas in terms of armies. When you look at how concepts like this are represented in other Games Workshop games, they're so much more elegant, so much more well thought out, and works so much better on the tabletop. This is just awful, and I just think it adds a lot of unnecessary complexity to an army that's already incomprehensible. I also understand that a lot of GSE players, or a lot of people who are running GSE, are incredibly competent players who use them at a very high level and are able to win events and do great things with them. I'm not disputing the fact that there isn't viability in it. I'm just saying that it's an awful way of approaching it. I think, sincerely, the biggest problem with GSC is that Games Workshop design has essentially narrowed their vision to the point that they don't know or can't figure out a way of redefining or, meaningfully reinventing this army. And they have this problem with so much stuff, but in the case of the GSC, it just feels like these guys are just handing L after L after L. Same for the Mechanicus. Like, it's terrible. This is awful. I honestly, I couldn't imagine anyone wanting to play GSC anymore. Hopefully they don't go the way of like Harlequins, where they just get to a point, or Death Watch, where they kind of get to a point where they just sort of make it tokenistic to the point that it's irrelevant, and then ultimately remove it over time. Hopefully they continue to support GSC. But yeah, I think a massive rewrite of, or just a massive reevaluation of GSC is in order. But again, the kind of fun, interesting gameplay mechanics that you could conceive of putting on GSE wouldn't be appreciated by the so important competitive scene that they don't want to disappoint. So ultimately, I think really at this point, you may as well just delete them. They're a terrible army made with terrible rules, but some of the greatest miniatures and most interesting backstory in the game. But GW just doesn't know what the hell to do with them, and this is awful. So well done, GW. This sucks. Good for you.
I mean, that is quite the spicy take. I almost don't know what to say, Dan. Here's the thing. I think regardless of the competitive viability of GSE or how complicated they are, is this Cult Ambush army rule good? I would say they always seem to be constantly changing the Cult Ambush rule, which makes me think they've never quite got it right. I think earlier mechanics might have been slightly better. So the one where you're randomly having stuff come back, which is what it was prior to this, that's not too bad, but they were like, oh, there's not enough strategy involved in it. I assume, again, for the competitive players that are like, oh no, I want this unit to come back and not this crappy unit, which this does solve. However, there are like layers of complication. It's like you've got this extra resource point management that you then have to spend. You need to remember how much each unit costs to spend. And maybe up front, you will be like, cool, this is my strategy coming into a game. I want, I'm going to build it. So I've got 10 points to spend, and I know exactly which units, when they die, I will bring those back, and they will be my 10 points, because I don't want to just spend 4 points. I want to maximize this rule as much as possible. It does feel like it could be quite easily open to abuse, where you just tell your opponent, oh yeah, I'm bringing this one back. Oh yeah, I've still got a bunch more points. Oh, this only costs 2 points when it costs 5, for example. But then you could say that about any game mechanic in the game.
Of course,
people can check
no
them.
Trouble. Yeah.
Is this did you say, is a layering of complexity on rules, and GSE have always been quite a complex army, so maybe it doesn't make too much of a difference to the players of GSE. But personally, I think in a way, rather than having units come back, it's just a turn one deployment method, which is what it was, I think, in, I want to say, 8th edition, where you do your ambush markers down on the table, and then it's your force ambushing. Whereas this is called Cult Ambush, but really it's stuff coming back from the dead. It's like a second wave of troops, which isn't really an ambush, really. Or,
give them a separate resource and let them put them in the army from the start. Like, if that's what you want to do, if you want to add like a second currency to the game specifically for these guys, just do that. Just go, there you go. We actually decided that, you just get this extra thing, but all these things have to be deployed in Deep Strike and can't enter till Battle Round 2. Just do that. Like, this is so stupid.
Yeah.
And again, To me, though, like genuinely, if I was given the task of trying to figure out what to do with GSE, I'd abandon everything that's come before it. I'd increase their damage level through the roof. I'd have them doing all sorts of mad stuff that really annoys my opponent. I'd have literally I'm a GSE player, so you can't deploy half your army. Cool, because I've done something. Or I'm a GSE player, you now get no CP and you can never get CP because I'm GSE, screw you. Something that basically speaks to their,
tricksy nature, a bit like the Crawl Boys in Age of Sigmar. Sorry to go to and talk about another edition, but they have loads of gimmicks that impact your opponent and loads of literal dirty tricks. And if anyone in 40k should be able to do those kind of mechanics, it should be GSE. Basically.
Oh, certainly, but the problem is it upsets people, doesn't it? Because people don't.
It's a feel bad. Yeah. Having abilities that you can do be removed by your opponent is very unfun. So I can sort of understand it. Yeah, to me, if I wasn't doing this, I would just do the deploy your tokens down turn 1, sort of anywhere on the board, and just have your units appear from them. As you say, either turn 1 or turn 2, and it's basically an elevated deep strike with units that you have put into reserve to do that at the beginning of the game. It's not additionally bringing extra units on. It's not, if you're going to have a stratagem that can do those kind of mechanics, like you have for other armies like Astra Militarum, cool in terms of that wave mechanic, but that isn't Cult to Ambush. That's extra troops. It's a different thing.
I think this is the thing with it. Basically, in 8th edition, they came up with a really fun set of mechanics for GSE that made them really unique and interesting. Because when they first introduced them in 7th edition, they were sort of a bit weird and a bit all over the place. They weren't, they used a lot of deep strike and reserves and what have you. But then in 8th, they came up with a really cool system and they shipped a codex that came with the markers. It actually came with these cult markers, and they were like, oh, that's kind of a really amazing idea, and this is a core part of their identity. In 8th edition, fair enough. But then in 9th edition, they were like, yeah, they got that, but then also, as well as that, they got this crossfire mechanic.
It was them that got crossfire, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very complicated, but it did give you the feeling of an ambush more so than just the ambush markers.
Totally.
So yeah, again, not something I necessarily disliked, but it was just an extra layer of complication.
I didn't like it much at all, but I feel like the thing is that essentially this is the thing, 10th edition 40k, as is evident throughout these updates that they've done, maybe really they should just never have done GSC so early on in the edition. Maybe they should have waited till they started understanding what the heck they had before layering that complexity on. Because I think the thing is at the moment is in my opinion, GSC just needs to go back to the drawing board. I understand that once upon a time, some clever person came up with a token system for 8th edition, and now they can't see past it, but I think they need to see past it. I think they need to stop looking at them as fragile units. I think they need to stop thinking about them in a horde mentality. I think it's obscene to get people to have to buy. And again, I'm not saying that they're holding a gun to your head and making you buy this stuff, but if you are someone who wants to play GSC or was excited by the idea of them, the amount of miniatures you've got to buy to be able to field this army is crazy. And the cost that they charge you for them is wild. And that's before you even then start having to paint the things, which is another world of madness. So yeah, look, overall, I just want GSE to go away at this point. I just think as they are, they're a horrible mess and they need to go away.
No, I disagree with you there, Dan. Here's the thing. I think you need to have them be a horde army, because basically you go elite armies don't have many models, custodies, knights. They only have a handful of models. Then you go, okay, Space Marines, a bit more, but still pretty elite. But then you look at the other end of the scale, you go Astra Militarum, right? They're plentiful. You have lots of bodies unless you have things like tanks. If you just look on an infantry level, you've got a lot of models. Now, Gene Sealer Cult are basically not even militia, unless you include the, obviously the sort of PDF version with the Astra Militarum, but they are just dog's body civilians that have, been corrupted by the Gene Sealer Cult. So ultimately, you need to have almost more models on the table than Astra Militarum. And maybe if you want them to be more elite, you either introduce units that can be elite, like you've got the Aberrants and the Jackals and things like that, and the vehicles.
Yeah.
So you either need to lean more in that direction, or you go as a game on the whole, all the other armies need to have less models, and therefore we can then also reduce down the sort of average infantry count on the Genestealer cult. I don't think you could have a Genestealer cult army that's, say, more elite than Elder in terms of or Astra Militarum in terms of the number of models that should be on the table. I think there's a general hierarchy of factions and sort of body count that you need to sort of factor in across everyone, and that you need to play into those sort of tropes and themes that each army has, basically.
Maybe. I just think, as I say, like I understand that there is a baked-in history here, and people struggle to see past that. And you're right, like there is a lore element to it. But as I say, in an edition where you can take hundreds of Space Marine infantry in an army, how much is enough to fulfill that vision?
I think, again, that's the problem. Being able to take hundreds of Space Marines, if that is at all possible, that shouldn't be a thing. Like, you need to tone those things down to then make the Genestealer cult seem more sensible when, I think ultimately you go, what's the maximum number of models you should have in an army of any kind? You would go, okay, maybe 100, which is an obscene number, but that's still quite high. And, if you're taking just Grots or Imperial Guard, that's sort of what you want. And then you work your way backwards from there. And I think that's what they probably need to do with Genestealer cult. They shouldn't be encouraging Genestealer cult players to need 200 models to have a viable army if they just took the cheapest thing possible. So, yeah, that'd be silly.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So, yeah, you can, admittedly, an amount of them, about 40 of them are neophytes, but if you take...
neophytes they are technically Space Marines, but they are a niche type of Space Marine in terms of Black Templars. If you were talking about generic Space Marines, like Codex Space Marines...
So 60 of them are Space Marines... and then 40 of them. 40 of them are neophytes. But for 1,600 points, that's 100 Marines.
Oh, okay. That's only 1,600. So you've still got another almost
400.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you could probably get just 100 actual Space Marines if you don't include.
Oh, easily. Yeah. I just looked at that one just as a sort of starting point.
Yeah. Okay. That's mad. That's mad. Give me the old White Dwarf days of like 3 units plus a Dreadnought and a character and a Terminator squad. Be done.
Here's a question. Oh, no, actually, even easier. Yeah, God. I mean, God, if you took Tactical Marines, if you went crazy, 6 units of Tactical Marines. Oh, people can see my calculator come up here. 6 units of Tactical Marines would be a whopping... Guess how much 60 Tactical Marines are, Phil?
10-man units, yeah.
10, they come 10 man.
800 points?
Yeah, 840, yeah.
I was saying preparing for the quiz that probably won't happen.
Yes, indeed. But yeah, 840 points to 60 Tactical Marines. So yeah, that basically, that I think is the thing with GSC. But anyway, we've really gone on a tangent. Let's... get back on this. So next, Grey Knights, nothing for Grey Knights. So there we go. Although I think they do have an ability, a stratagem that will have been impacted by the whole 3-inch deployment thing.
I mean, it's worth quickly saying that there were a bunch of other changes for GSC that we're just glossing over in terms of ranges of abilities and other stuff.
Yes. Yeah, that's fair. Imperial agents, no real amazing things. They've just changed the Caluxus to align with the 3-inch rule. No changes to Imperial Knights, no changes to Leagues of Votan. There are very small changes to Necrons, in so much as the Annihilation Legion detachment, so the Annihilation Protocol detachment rule add the following paragraph. Each time a destroyer cult unit from your army makes a ranged attack that targets the closest eligible target, add 1 to the armor penetration characteristics of that attack. Wowzers. And then they've changed the amount of stuff that go back into reserve.
The hyperphase. Yeah, I assume they've knocked this down by at least 1. Because
they have,
yeah, Strike Force I think used to be 3 units and it's now 2 units because again that was a very strong ability. I'm surprised they haven't actually changed that for Grey Knights because Grey Knights also had that kind of ability, but maybe they already had less models than the Necron ones.
I think the difference is Grey Knights don't have Catan. I think that's basically where the difference comes in.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Orcs, big change to War. It's now at the start of your command phase. So you call a War, you do until the start of your next command phase. So it's not battle round anymore, it's command phase. So
sensible.
Yeah, sensible, but it means that you may not be able to use it defensively.
Yeah, because it gave you an invuln save as well, didn't it? Whereas you would technically also be using it for charges, mostly, like running and charging around. Personally, that's to me what it should be for. It shouldn't really be a defensive thing.
But it was good that it had defensive benefits.
If you weren't going first.
See the lay of the land. Yeah, exactly, right? Like you could basically set up and see that, again, maybe doing charge. It had some benefits if you were going second, essentially, because you could see what was happening when making that decision. But now I suppose at least you can effectively see the lay of the land in your command phase if you're going second and make a decision based on the fact that you're going to go in hard. And it's not that you lose it. It's not like you don't still have it for your opponent's turn. Mm-hmm. It's just that you won't be able to maybe optimize its use in a defensive sense. Otherwise, the big hunt detachment. So at the start of your command phase, select 1 monster, vehicle, or character unit from your opponent's army until the start of your next command phase. That enemy unit is your prey. So, it didn't used to include... I think it didn't used to include characters. I'm guessing it didn't used to include characters.
By the way, the character word is in red. That implies it's an addition.
But the ore isn't in red, Phil. That's the thing that's throwing me. What was it before? Was it just infantry?
Maybe, yeah. Which seems odd. Yeah, interesting.
So maybe now it was just infantry before, but now it isn't. Or maybe it was mounted. I don't know. I can't remember, but it is this now. So,
well, weirdly, yeah, the hunt implies you are going for big things. So, yeah, maybe mounted. I don't know. Character makes sense. Character
does make sense. That one's even bigger. Stratagem. To the end of your phase, your unit is eligible to charge in a turn in which it advances and falls back. In addition, you can re-roll charge rolls made for your unit, provided that the target of that charge is the prey. That makes sense. And then they've changed Gazkol Fracker, Prophet of the Great War. While this unit is leading a unit... A unit leading a unit. Weird vernacular. Anyway, each time a model in that unit makes a melee attack, add 1 to the hit roll and 1 to the wound roll. And if the war is active for your army, a critical hit is scored with a successful unmodified hit roll of 5+. Fancy. I'm guessing it used to happen
regardless. So I think the critical hits on 5+, they've now changed to only be active if you're in a war. So a bit of a nerf, technically.
Space Marines have loads of changes. We're going to look past that because we're going to do them as the final thing. So Space Wolves just have changes to the Wolf Scout's melee weapon, which is a knife that is now -1. No changes to Tau Empire. Thousand Suns have only had the change to their Predator Annihilator. Tyranids have got a change to Assimilation Swarm Detachment. Phil, you've looked at playing Nids. Have you ever thought about taking an Assimilation Swarm? I seem to remember it was terrible, but who knows?
No, I'm going to say no. But I assume you want me to read out what's going on.
Tell us, Phil, tell us. I think it was the one where I can't even remember what it is. Doesn't matter.
Anyway, so in your command phase, each harvester unit from your army can regenerate one friendly Tyranid unit within 6 inches of it. A unit can only be regenerated once per phase. Each time a unit regenerates, do one of the following. One model in your unit regens up to D3 plus 1 lost wound. I'm assuming it was D3 or maybe only 1 wound or something, because that's the thing that's changed. But in addition, one destroyed infantry model, excluding characters, is returned to that unit with its full wounds remaining. If that unit is an endless multitude unit, up to 3 destroyed models are returned instead. Yeah, it's interesting that the bit that's also changed is a stipulation on your army. So, yeah, who knows? But I'm assuming that's a mild increase from what it was before.
Yeah.
Oh, and the Norn Assimilator gains the Harvester keyword.
Which I guess makes sense, I suppose. I mean, he's got lots of pipes on his head. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and then the Trigon has the change from 3 inches to 6 inches by the looks of it.
Indeed it
the
does.
Deep striking.
And then last things last, the World Eaters, essentially the World Eaters Demon Prince Infernal Fortitude ability, while friendly World Eater infantry unit is within 6 of this model. Models that have a 5+ invulnerable save, unless they already have a 5+ invulnerable save, in which case they have a 4+ invulnerable save. Ooh. So that's pretty neat. And then World Eaters, Predator Annihilators get to reroll their damage. Yeah.
Tasty.
Pretty cool. Against monsters and vehicles, admittedly. So that's everything that isn't Space Marines. Space Marines are the big thing, so we're going to get into that next. But we'll do a little quick sort of summary for this section, just because, we like to kind of sign off on these things. So before we move over to talk about Space Marines, Phil, what has the vibe been with this?
I mean, overall, seems pretty good, I would say. I'm actually quite excited about the Custodes ones, because that's the army I've been playing, changes, yeah. And it's a well-needed update, so I'm super pleased about that. I mean, A-star, Games Workshop, well done. All the others, I mean, obviously we've not done the Space Marine ones, but everything else seems like a relatively sensible change. Obviously, GSE, a bit complicated, maybe not quite correct, but, I'm not a Gene Stealer Cult player. I haven't played against them in a while. Yeah. You don't want them to exist, so
It's not that I don't want them to exist. I just want better. I just want them. I think an army with miniatures that are so cool, with such an interesting lore and such an compelling kind of idea behind them, need to be better realized. It just frustrates me because it just feels like they phoned it in and now they're just trying constantly to come up with an idea and they're just sort of falling short. And again, like I was sort of saying, you're absolutely right, Phil. The Cruel Boys or the Skaven from AOS realised the ideas of this kind of, treacherous kind of, dastardly army that is coming up and doing all this sort of mad shenanigans. And I think that's the thing. It's like these concepts have been really well realised in other systems. And again, the 8th edition rules for GSC were really fun. They were really interesting. They were great in 8th edition.
I'm not necessarily sure the Cult Ambush ones were great, but I think the army army was a bit underwhelming. But
what's that, GSC?
Yeah.
What, in 8th edition?
Yeah.
No, they were mad fun. They had loads of really crazy. Again, the rules they created for GSC in 8th edition felt very well aligned with the kind of gameplay design of the system. And the way the tokens worked made a lot of sense. And again, it was a bit of a mental gymnastics, because you were like, right, well, hang on, which of these markers are now, or which of these units relate to what? Because they basically had a mechanic. Anyway, people don't need to hear about what the old rules were. They were complicated. I'm not going to pretend they weren't, but they weren't this. It was just sort of, it's just very, I just think GSC deserved better. And I think the people who put a lot of work into building, painting, collecting, and, having really beautiful GSC armies, I think I just don't know. Basically, what it comes down to is I don't understand why anyone would play GSC anymore, because I look at it and I just think this is this is just such a. I also don't know why anyone would play Mechanicus either. I just look at those two armies and I just go, they're two armies. Actually, as well, let's throw Deathwatch in the mix. Basically, the 3 armies that they added at the end of 7th edition, they just don't ever seem to know what to do with. They just never seem to have an idea of how to make them work. So there you go. I just sort of, I just feel like those 3 armies are always just a little bit red-headed stepchild type vibes.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Or at least they definitely feel that way currently in 10th edition.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'd be interested to see what the GSE players actually think about this change.
Well, maybe they'll tell us, eh? Maybe they'll tell me off.
Let us know. I mean, yeah, maybe it's not that complicated and we're overthinking it in terms of the rules levels, but it doesn't seem as simple as some of the older versions of rules, and certainly more complicated than the last one where you just roll a dice when something dies and then it comes back. That would be easier for sure. Yeah.
And to be clear, I feel bad for the GSE players. I want them to have a better army. I want them to be more fun. I just want the thing to be better. I just think at the moment, this isn't it for GSE. So I feel bad for the GSE players. I feel bad for the Sisters players to a certain extent, although Sisters have been really strong for a really long time. So I'm not too worried about that. But at the same time, obviously, it sucks that Miracle Dice have been nerfed to the point that they're not probably as reliable as they used to be. That's probably a good thing. And then also, in addition to all of that, I really am quite intimidated by the changes to Custodes, but I think it is necessary and proper that they got those. So I think that's good overall. Orc players kind of feel a little let down by it in terms of the change of the war, but I think that will come out in the wash okay. Other than that, I think it seems all right, really.
And your Dark Angels, happy? Content?
I think, look, at the end of the day, very happy on the Dark Angel front. I think, good changes there overall. But yeah, Dark Angels are still in a weird place. Dark Angels have always been a weird chapter historically in terms of codexes. There's always been a weird issue with Dark Angels books. They've always sort of been a bit weirdly bad all the time, but whatever. It's part of their charm, you know?
Yeah, got to be different.
Got to be all emo-y, wear your hoods, etc. That's why I've actually got my hood up today for this episode, I'm doing it in memoriam to the Dark Angels.
Yeah, fair.
There you go. All right, we're going to transition out of this and move over to talking about the Space Marine changes. So we'll do that now. Transitional noise.